Welcome to this edition of Deep Purple. If you're not familiar with Deep Purple, it's basically daily delivery where I don't know when to shut up. But we also add a few bells and whistles that we typically don't in the DD. So this is a little bit longer, a little bit deeper dive into what we are discussing. And this one's been a struggle. We've had all kinds of technical issues. It was supposed to be up by now, but here we go. Let's give it another shot from the Cats and Dogs studio. And the dogs are in here, so they might make an appearance behind me somewhere. But Monday's press conference with Chris Klieman was a little bit different. Now, we found out something's going on with his family. I won't get into that, but our prayers go out to the Klieman family and those who are having some issues right now. And he got a little philosophical at the end. Now, look, Chris Klieman can get philosophical, but this was really interesting. And one of my colleagues started off this philosophical phase by picking up on the conversation about parity across college football, which tied into the loss at Houston and why that's happening. And explanation one was the transfer portal. So I could talk a lot about what he said, or I could let him say it himself. So let's bring in Chris Klieman from Monday and look at this clip. I'll be here hanging out in the corner being weird. Chris, we need to talk about this pose. I mean, that's where the clip started. You look like a stoner, man. But anyhow, let's move forward with this and hear from Chris Klieman. It was a great question about parity throughout college football and how the transfer portal has somewhat balanced the scales. Here we go.
It's pretty obvious. You know, people can go where they want to go at any time they want to go, and you can get a revamped team and lineup, and there's coaching changes and player changes, and it's the ultimate free agency. And so, kid's not playing at one school; he's going to go to the next school. That's what it is right now, and that's nobody's got a beef with it. That's just the way it is, which has enabled teams to get good quickly. Look at Indiana. You know, I think that's a great story in college football. It's really good what Cignetti's doing there because he got a bunch of guys and brought a bunch of guys from JMU, and they all clicked together. Doesn't always click when you bring in a bunch of new guys. It did for him, and so those stories are good for college football. We don't want to always see the brand all the time. We want to see some other schools, and that's why it's this game is so great. We just got to find some guardrails outside the lines, which we're not going to get into today.
That was good stuff. That was really good stuff. And he's right. The transfer portal has had some impact, and there are players going up. We've seen it at Kansas State. Will Howard's at Ohio State. You know, Kobe Savage is now at Oregon. They're out there. But what we've seen from the portal is a lot of settling in the middle of talent. And whether that's non-Power 4 or even FCS talent moving in to the Power 4, which happens quite a bit, and supplementing those rosters at the detriment of those smaller schools, but maybe they're picking up players that help them in a similar fashion. We've seen some, big guys go upwards, but we've also seen a lot of talent come downwards that didn't get the type of playing time they wanted at a big school. And in the past, the big schools, the big budgets could pile up that talent because it was hard to transfer. Now it just takes going into an office and saying during a certain time of year, I want to transfer, and into the portal you go to find a new school. And that's kind of evened out talent across college football. Not fully. Let's not fool ourselves that recruiting's even now, because the biggest stars in college football, at least coming out of the high school ranks, end up at a set number of schools typically. And that's caused an interesting effect because those players get there and they find out that maybe it wasn't what they thought it was, and they come back down the ladder, so to speak. And when I talk about up and down the ladder, I mostly mean budget, and also, let's be honest here, there's just a handful of elite programs that deal in different areas of college football than the rest of the programs, even at Power 4, whether it's Alabama, Georgia, or even Texas, Ohio State, and Michigan, and others. They just have a different set of rules when it comes to recruiting. They kind of get who they want. But let's get more of Chris Klieman here as he talks about answers a question for me and gets into the NIL a little bit, because I thought this was interesting, because I have some strong opinions on the NIL, and I'm not sure that Coach Klieman fully agrees with me, but I do want to say this. Kansas State has managed its football NIL really well. It has focused its money on players in the program, with a couple of notable exceptions, the most important being Avery Johnson. And I'll get into why that's important in a little bit, but paying star recruits a bunch of money out of high school to come to Kansas State, well, that's not the gig. And unless you're a really special player that might bring something to the table that you want to have at Kansas State more than what other schools can recognize you for in terms of financial value. I'll get into that in a second, but let's return to Chris Klieman. Let's see what we've got him paused on right now. This is always good. Yep, that's a good one. Here we go. Coming into the NIL period, when we knew it was coming, I think we all assumed that the rich would get richer with the NIL. It's been the opposite of that, hasn't it?
I couldn't tell you that. I don't know where you're going with that, Fitz. I really don't, because you can look at Oregon and Ohio State, and the rich got richer, right? I mean that and once again, guys, I don't know everybody's NIL money. I have no idea. But you take a school like Indiana, I don't know how much money they had, but they got the right guys. I have no idea. But that's just why this game is got such parity, is because kids can come and go, and that's coaches can come and go. Kids can. It's nobody's faulting anybody for it at all. But it has. It's you. I don't know why. I don't who won and who lost it. I don't know why LSU didn't play their best football against Alabama. I don't know why we didn't play our best football against Houston. I can tell you some reasons why we didn't do really well. I don't know why Georgia Tech can beat but that's the great thing about this game. It's 18 to 22, 23, 24-year-olds because of 6 and 7 and 8 years that come together and find a way to be successful on Saturday. And every game is different. Every game's it's a new season. What you did last week, and we talk about this, guys, for the last 6 years I've been here, what you did last week has no bearing and nothing to do with next week. And matchups are different, so on and so forth. It's hard to win in college football.
Yes, it is. And he kind of spun off there in a little bit different direction. But here's my opinions on the NIL. And I love that answer, though, by Chris Klieman, because it explains a lot of what's going on in the game we love so much right now. I feel like the NIL is still a huge advantage for that upper echelon talent. And the bigger schools will pay bigger amounts of money to kids out of high school. They're willing to take that financial risk, while a school such as Kansas State and most of the Big 12 can't afford to take a big chunk of their budget and put it towards one player, unless that player has maybe what they see as value beyond what others might see, including being from Kansas. Now, I don't know Lincoln Kier's NIL money, and that's not been his motivation in his recruitment out of Goodland, Kansas. He's now rated as not just a 5-star tight end, but as the best tight end in this 2025 recruiting class. And he's committed to Kansas State. My point being, a player like Avery Johnson out of Mays, the Wichita area, holds more value to Kansas State, probably in NIL, than other schools. He was a high 4-star. So at Kansas State, his value as a potential superstar, but being from the state of Kansas, probably means his NIL value to Kansas State might be more than an Oregon or Notre Dame or any of the other schools that have tried to get him out of high school and continue to try to poach him away from Kansas State now that he's established some value. The NIL can be your ability to keep kids that you really value more than anyone else. But here's another wrinkle the NIL brings: unlimited resources if you've got the right donor. Now, Kansas State's got incredible donors. They're doing amazing work in basketball and football, but there isn't that T. Boone Pickens. There isn't that huge name. Some of those unknown names maybe at an SMU. SMU, with their amount of money they can bring in and their fan interest in football success, could become a real powerhouse. Why? Because there might be a donor at SMU that looks at the football coach and says, "You want $20 million a year for NIL or $40 million for NIL. There's no limit to it right now. And as Chris Klieman just said, we got to get some guardrails in place. Again, the NCAA has been asleep at the wheel and pouting like a little kid that didn't get their way because the courts overruled them in so much and threw college football into chaos. Was the chaos caused by the courts or by the NCAA not accommodating those rulings and finding a way to deal with it? All I know is this NIL world has had a strange impact on all of college athletics, as has the transfer portal. It has shifted the landscape in such dramatic ways that some want to freeze the landscape and not let it shift anymore, at least in perception. That would, of course, be the SEC and Big Ten, desperately trying to form a alliance here where they'll only schedule each other and they'll ignore the ACC, the Big 12, and any other decent program. They want to freeze those programs where they're at because the evolution is in their favor right now. The evolution of the college game has tilted the scales towards them. The TV money has made them have a greater advantage, and they want to stop the count, so to speak. Right now, it's over. This is how it's going to be forever. And I think the rest of us feel like, let's play the games. Let's go recruit and get players and be all on the same page and all play by the same rules. It seems like a simple ask, but it isn't that easy, is it? We're heading into another recruiting season coming up as the early signing period arrives and maybe surprises. And naturally, we'll also see some players transferring at the end of the season. We'll see how it sorts out. But Kansas State has done fairly well, maybe less so with the portal in the last few years. But if they get that back on track and they show that they can add the right pieces, just as Illinois did with a massive rebuild, then they too could take the next step forward. And that's true for every program in the Big 12. That's it for this Deep Purple. I appreciate you watching. Back to more K-State versus Arizona State coverage at GoPowercat. It's going to be a big game Saturday night at the Bill. I'm Fitz, and thank you for watching.